Hi, I'm Laura Noonan. I'm the Financial Times US Banking Editor, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here to a very important session on the evolution of gender diversity in boardrooms and beyond, and what the fallout from the COVID era will mean for the future. I'm delighted to have with me virtually three trailblazing women who really managed to climb to the top of their industries and really overcome a lot of gender barriers. And they're here today to discuss with us both how things have gone for the last few decades, but also the particular juncture that we're at now, and what it is companies and executives like you in the audience can do to make sure that the challenges posed by the COVID pandemic don't actually end up resetting us in terms of all the progress which has been made. So we're going to talk with the four of us. However, we're definitely very much in the market for your questions. So please do use the chat function to ask us questions, and we will absolutely do our very best to accommodate as many of those as we possibly can. Since we have so much to cover and such an awesome panel, we're going to kick straight off. I'm going to first go to Eileen Murray, who's chair of FINRA and who's also former chief executive of Bridgewater Associates. Eileen, you've had a fantastic finance career. You've been in the industry for a very long time. Can you maybe tell us about the progress which has been made so far, and how different a place Wall Street is now from a gender diversity perspective than the Wall Street that you joined?
Yeah, thank you, Laura, and thank you for having me back at the conference. I would say, when I first started 4 decades ago now, it was a time when 0.5% of senior positions were held by women. Today, it's 17 to 20%. And honestly, I don't think it's, we've made slow progress. And it's different in terms of, I can remember, Laura, being asked to make the business case for diversity. And I remember laughing and saying, would you be able to give me the business case for homogeneity? And unfortunately, nobody thought it was funny. They were dead serious. Fortunately, today, we don't have to make the business case for diversity. We know that PBT and ROE is substantially better for firms that have diverse teams versus firms that don't. And that's been proven study after study after study. So I think, we're fortunate we don't have to go back to the days of basically getting people to understand how important this is and how good it is for business, notwithstanding the right thing to do. That, I would say, is the big change. All of that said, I don't know whether to do the happy dance sometimes for the progress we've made or to cry. And more recently, I think it's more towards the tears. We have a lot further to go, and I look forward to making additional progress on this.
I think it's fair to say we had a lot further to go even coming into the 2020 year. Then you think about the additional challenges raised by the pandemic and everyone working from home, schools closing, childcare disproportionately falling on the shoulders of the mothers. So Sharon, I want to bring you in here now. We have Sharon Thorne, who's chair of the Global Board of Directors from Deloitte. And I know Deloitte has done a lot of research around this area. So Sharon, can you maybe talk us through your perspective in how the COVID situation changes things from a gender diversity perspective?
Yeah, no, thank you, Laura. And I just wanted to echo what Eileen has said, because there's simply, there still are not enough women in senior leadership, and especially in those executive operational roles that could lead to women becoming a CEO. And also, even more worryingly, there are not enough women in the pipeline in middle management to come through. But, until COVID, we were making reasonable, although painfully slow progress, but it is exposing and exacerbating existing inequalities. It's having a disproportionate impact on women and girls. So, women work in the sectors hardest hit, such as hospitality and travel. And estimates suggest globally that women's jobs are 1.8 times as likely to be cut in this recession than jobs held by men. And more women are healthcare workers, so they're more at risk on the front line. You mentioned about girls being out of school. The pressure to supplement household income is forcing millions. The UN has estimated that it's 740 million girls out of school due to the impact of COVID and closures. And then things like, about 50 million additional women are going without contraceptives because of the pandemic, which will lead to a lot of additional unplanned pregnancies. And there's an alarming increase in gender-based violence. It's going to take some time to see the full impact, but we're skewing a playing field that was never level in the first place. And as you mentioned, Deloitte has done a report interviewing, surveying a number of women about the impact of COVID. And they're referencing how it's upending their work and life balance, affecting physical and mental health. And some are even questioning their current and long-term career prospects. So a couple of statistics. 89% said demands on their personal time and daily routine have changed due to the pandemic, with 92% of that group indicating these shifts have had a negative impact. So 40% say they're unable to balance work and life commitments, and 40% cite significant consequences to their physical and mental well-being. And 65% have become more responsible for household chores. And worryingly, 46% feel they always have to be available for work. So, it is very challenging, and you can see it. I see it in my own sister and my friends juggling jobs, and the massive increase of domestic duties and schooling children. So, but it is particularly challenging.
Yeah, there's obviously massive amount of stress in the system at the moment, and I guess there are challenges that people and employers included haven't really had much time to think about how they can support people through that. Joyce, I'd like to bring in now Joyce Chang, who's Managing Director and Chair of Global Research for JP Morgan. And I know from years covering JP Morgan that JP Morgan does really try to prioritise diversity, and they've really done a lot in terms of women's advancement. But are there meaningful things that employers can do at this point so that COVID doesn't actually set back the women's advancement, Joyce?
Well, thanks so much, Laura. And it's so great to be with Eileen and Sharon, who've done so much in the industry. But I just wanted to start with a couple of statistics on just the impact of COVID-19 and how we've looked at it. So, this recession is different because it's hitting the services sector. And if you take a look at high income countries, 90% of the women hold jobs in the services sector. That compares to like 64% of men. So you can really see it in the numbers immediately, the impact it had. So if you just take a look at the United States in female labor force participation, you are at like 76.7% in January. That went down full 3 percentage points by May for women who are in sort of the child raising years, 35 to 44 years old. Then it went up in the summer, and then it went back down in September. So you could really see, actually, just in looking at the labor statistic numbers, like a percentage point drop that was just, really sizable, which just shows you the childcare dilemma that Sharon talked about and that Eileen talked about. And, our own numbers say the same thing. It's that women who are full-time working women still bear the majority of the responsibilities for childcare. But what has JP Morgan done, and what have we done that's different? So I think, Eileen, Sharon, and I all have been just very active with our women's networks. But one thing that JP Morgan did 2 years ago is they said, we want to take the women's network and not just focus on advancement, retention, and sponsorship of women. We want you to go out into the community. We want to support women-owned businesses, and we also want to improve financial literacy. And Jamie Dimon set hard goals on this. We want you to lend $10 billion to women-owned businesses over 3 years. So 2019, the first year of this program, there was actually $3.8 billion of lending to women-owned businesses that was done. And we found a lot of things doing the research that women lack the access to capital in small businesses. They have only 18% the access to external financing as men. So there was a real effort to target women-owned businesses. The second thing was just in focusing on financial literacy and starting earlier. And, I've been very involved with an organization called Girls Inc., which deals with a lot of high school, middle-aged girls. But it was even starting the financial literacy at that point in their lives and getting them involved and engaged. Usually most of these girls in underserved communities are raised by a single mother. And getting the parents involved so they save for college and that we really improve the financial literacy. So one thing we did was really actually look at just the skills and the funding for women-owned businesses and what we could do to actually make a difference in that area. But COVID-19 has been a big setback for women in the services sector because it has affected retail, it's affected the restaurant businesses and healthcare where women's jobs are concentrated. So I think that it is actually going to be more challenging coming out of this, for a lot of women who've been adversely affected.
And when we think about women in the financial sector, and Eileen, I'd like to bring you in here in terms of the kind of support, is there anything that companies can do to support women in the financial sector so that they don't fall behind at this time? Are there any kind of exceptional measures that they can take, or is it effectively just a very exceptional situation that we're all in? Everyone just has to do their best and get on with it. Eileen?
I would say two things. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Sharon and Joyce for that, the statistics. I would say a couple of things, Laura, in terms of what firms can do. Firms can do a lot of things, but I think first and foremost, inclusion is incredibly important. I think there's been a lot of focus on diversity. There's been a lot of focus on diversity statistics. I applaud investors who have been insisting on seeing diversity statistics, et cetera, in terms of how they're going to pass their money out in terms of where they invest. So when we talk about what can companies do, I think the one big thing is inclusion. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I applaud what the NASDAQ recently did in terms of asking the SEC to basically, follow Europe, really, in terms of having more representation on boards, but I fear it's not enough. I think that, quite candidly, I think that, we should really look to basically have statistics, much the same way we look at market and credit risk. Look at how well managed that is. Look at the disclosures. So I think having disclosures mandatory on diversity, because we're great at bringing people in. The incoming classes are very diverse, but as we go up the food chain, that changes. I think if companies had to basically publicly publish their statistics on diversity and be accountable to them, and then boards holding them accountable, I think that would go a long way. And lastly, what I would say is in terms of how do you recognize companies that are doing this if you actually believe the studies that PBT and ROE is better for diverse groups of people? Showing those statistics, holding the CEOs accountable, I think is important. And I would actually, 25 years ago, I would never have said what I'm about to say. I think some of these things should be mandated, and I think there should be quotas. And the reason I say that is I've spent 40 years, and back in 1980, I thought, oh my gosh, we'll fix this in about 15 years because it just made so much sense. It hasn't happened, and we need something much more dramatic than the kinds of great things firms are doing, but it just hasn't moved the needle enough. We have to do something more.
Because on the issue of the quotas, I'm trying to stop the people in the middle from. So with a lot of the firms I cover, I see a lot of intake diversity. And then as you go higher up the ranks, people just don't stay in the workforce. So Sharon, in terms of what you've seen out there, what are the most effective things companies can do to stop that leakage? So say you have a professional services firm, you have a financial services firm, they hire a lot of females, they hire a lot of other diverse candidates. And the people, for whatever reason, end up either not actually being able to progress through the organization or end up leaving the organization. What are the most effective ways to stop that happening in this era or in any era, really?
So, I could give you an academic lecture for a long time if I was going to go into that in detail. One of the things I wanted to give you just one specific example of was sponsorship, because I think that, if you think about informal networks and, if an organization is headed by white males, the sort of informal networks that happen mean that they tend to bring more men through. And if you give people opportunities, it enables them to develop, to enable them to move to the next promotion, to be available for the next promotion. It gives them exposure, it gives them good experience. And so I think sponsorship is something that, can make a real difference. And it's even tougher in this current environment because networking opportunities have diminished. Yeah. So as I said, I do think the current networking favors men. And I do think sponsors can play a key role in identifying promotion, development opportunities for their sponsees. So for women, I've been enormously fortunate throughout my career to have had a number of people sponsoring me at different points who provided me with fantastic opportunities. Now, it wasn't formal and I wasn't aware of it early on. However, I can look back and see how I was positioned and developed. You get an opportunity, it goes well, it leads to the next opportunity and so on. So I now personally sponsor and mentor a number of women, and I get huge satisfaction from seeing the impact as they progress. And last year, I launched something called The Wave at Deloitte, where I asked every member of our global board and global executive to sponsor at least one woman, and most of them agreed to sponsor at least 3. And then for them to cascade that down throughout their leadership team. So it created this wave across the organization. And I just say to everyone out there, if you're a leader, I'd encourage you to be a sponsor and also a mentor. And if you don't have a sponsor, make sure you find one, because I do think it can make a massive difference of helping to bring women through into the pipeline and to get them ready for these opportunities.
And what do you think about the benefits of having a male sponsor versus having a female sponsor? If you think that a lot of the power is still rooted in men, is there an argument that actually you're better off trying to break into the male clique by having a male sponsor?
So there aren't enough senior women for a start. Yeah. So you absolutely do need to have male sponsors. And you're absolutely right. If they're the people in positions of power, then you definitely need them to be engaged. So when I talk to our leaders, I'm asking every single one of them, male and female, to take this on. But, it depends on the individual. I've had mainly male sponsors, but that's mainly because they were the only people above me.
Yeah. It becomes a selection, yeah, thing or worse. Joyce, I want to bring you in here as well in terms of practical supports and the practical steps companies could take during this particular era. I mean, how actively do you think the company should be managing the departure, or should be monitoring the departure of women who are just dropping out of the workforce because of childcare pressure, because of too many balls to juggle? Is that something the company should be actively monitoring, and how should they be stepping in to stop that happening?
We have a requirement that you have to have an exit interview just so that these issues are discussed. But there's 3 programs that we've come up with at JP Morgan that really are aimed at targeting women at the point where they leave. So we have one that's called VP Academy, Vice President Academy, because we do find that when women are in their 30s and they're juggling, young children, and they're really kind of trying to establish their brand and their presence, that's when we lose a lot of people, because you get a lot of training when you're an analyst and an associate. You often start 50-50 with men. So there's something called VP Academy, which really does focus specifically on presentation skills, how you develop a brand, how you get a sponsor, all of these things. We have another one called Maternity Mentors, where during your maternity leave, you have a maternity mentor who is somebody who's had children. I mean, it's kind of by definition who's going to be the most helpful. And the third one we have, and you raised it in the last question, that's called Men as Allies. Yeah. And so all of the committees that we have right now that focus on recruitment and retention, they have to have one male subcommittee member as well. And it was like, we felt like we were preaching to the converted. So I think that there are definitely things that you can do and say, like, at what point in their career do women leave and why do they leave?
Yeah, but I want to ask you specifically about what you're doing now around COVID. So I guess very directly, are you guys actively monitoring women dropping out of the workforce because of COVID-related pressures, and how are you alleviating that?
Well, I think what everybody has done during COVID is really allow the flexibility. I mean, we know that women have a lot of the childcare responsibilities. So, there hasn't been the requirements have been, you haven't had to be in the office, and a lot of people haven't been in the office, period. But also there's been more flexibility on the hours. So that was the key thing and in finance, you can actually put that flexibility online in a virtual setting. So it was first making sure that people knew that they could take the flexibility on the hours, and also on coming into the office physically, and making that very clear.
Well, I mean, to be fair, everyone has flexibility on that, given the healthcare situation as well. I mean, I think both men and women and people as humans have flexibility on that. Eileen, I want to come to you here as well. You were talking earlier about data, quotas, how important all of that is. How do you think people should be handling departures of women during the COVID crisis? Do you see that as being a distinct phenomena from the general departure of women that companies should be monitoring separately, or do you think that it's just all part of the same thing and doesn't really merit kind of separate examination?
I'm going to say this again. I think that a lot of the things that both Sharon and Joyce said are things that are great, that really help women, sponsorship, etc. I'm going to come back to your question. But I really think that, we've been talking about this for years, and I'm going to keep getting on this bandwagon of we have to mandate some disclosures, because not every company does it. Back to your specific question, I sponsored work from home in the mid-'80s, and a lot of it was to do flexibility. I think with COVID, things are a little bit different in terms of the amount of care that people have to take, et cetera, et cetera. You're absolutely right. Everyone's has flexibility. I think looking at the particular situation that women are in, and if you really do want to keep them, can you help them monetarily with some of the care costs that they might additionally have that others don't have? So I think you have to go above and beyond. Years ago, we would give people scholarships coming out of colleges. Well, people that are in the mid ranks, if you want to keep them and you want to hold on to them, what is their particular circumstance? Are you on top of it? Is the manager on top of it? And how much would it really cost to help these women out versus see them go away? So, I'm all for capitalism, so don't take this the wrong way. I really do think looking at the amount of money that would be required to help a lot of these people through these difficult times versus the cost of retraining and losing people, that trade-off needs to be looked at seriously. And I wonder, I'm not, in a CEO position right now. I would encourage CEOs to look at that and to see what can we do and what is the cost.
That is a super interesting point, because I hear a lot of theoretical things which all sound very good, but just talking to women in those situations, it seems to be that what they need at this moment is actually like practical help as opposed to long term. And I guess people are having trouble seeing beyond the next few months anyway, so long term things aren't really moving the dial for them. Sharon, in your case, can you think of throughout your own career how important actual like practical hands-on help was versus the kind of broader like sponsorship, networking, the things that led to a more long-term career progress?
So I absolutely agree. And the things that Eileen and Joyce have been saying absolutely resonate. And Eileen, your point that, in the 80s, you thought this was all going to be fixed just was such a reminder to me, because when I'm digressing slightly, Laura, I will come at you, but when I joined Deloitte, 50% of the women 50% of the people were women. And 10 years before me, 50% had been women. So I just thought it's inevitable that it will gradually happen. But of course, it hasn't. And, we are making progress, but we're, our sort of senior leadership level of partners it's improved from 20% to 24% over the last 2.5 years globally, which is a massive move. But 24% is still not where we need to be. We need to be at parity. It is very frustrating. Things that have helped me are just people understanding the situation you're going through. People have different things that go on in their lives. And so you need more support at different points, which is exactly, the point you're making, Laura. So, if I think about what we're doing for our people in COVID, we are, very conscious of the mental health impact for everybody, but trying to understand, are you getting the support? Are we really listening? How do we need to help you? And some of our firms have given carers or people, either of elderly people or younger people, additional time off to help them. So paid time off to help them with their responsibilities. And so we've been, very conscious of that.
And is there any broader role, do you think, for firms in trying to achieve a more even split in domestic duties between men and women? Or is that something which is more a question for society? Sharon, I'll stay with you for that and then go to Joyce.
It's a societal issue. You look at, it's a gender stereotype, and that's one of the massive challenges that women face. And the level of domestic chores that women were doing was already higher than men pre-COVID. But in COVID, it has just increased again, and it's very frustrating. But unfortunately, we have to, and the gender stereotypes affect men as well as women. So if you think about parental leave, women in a number of countries now, a significant number of countries, get quite a lot of time off and they're supported, but men don't. And it's been proven that if men are given paternity, reasonable, significant amounts of paternity, and they're encouraged by their companies to take it, that they then get much more involved in childcare, and that makes a massive difference to to their wives. And it means that their wives go on to have more fulfilling careers and can progress further than if they don't do that. So there is a lot to do around gender stereotypes more generally. And then I'm sure we'll come to it, but just talking about the culture in the workplace, there's a lot to do to change that.
Yeah, I want to come in to bring you in on the point around gender stereotypes as well. And one of the other banks I cover went through a phase of actively encouraging senior men to take the full paternity leave because they wanted to make women comfortable taking it, and they wanted to make other men comfortable. If they saw the head of this desk taking it, then the men who were legally entitled to it but had been a bit like, this would be bad for my career, it would look bad, might be encouraged to take it. So Joyce, how powerful is that in terms of making women feel comfortable taking more leave if you have men taking more leave?
Well, I think that is really important. So JP Morgan had started with a week of paternity leave and then moved it to 1 month pretty recently. But we've had a lot of the men blog about it and take the leave. And we've also made sure that if they're managing level director men, that we're very clear that they're taking the leave. And, I'm in an area like research. So men in research actually were amongst the first ones that took it. There was more resistance in some areas, like trading, to do this. But, I also, would just go back to the point that Eileen made, that one thing that just does increase the accountability is more disclosure, more discussion on the numbers. So, in the financial industry, there's a whole debate about the gender pay gap and who's reporting those numbers and who isn't. Europe has been way ahead on a lot of these metrics, but, the disclosure is, and that whole discussion around gender pay equity is a big thing. Having gender responsive policies, which includes paternity leave, very much as Sharon said, so that men, are, included in this. Is a big part of it as well. But I do think you need to have those examples, because it used to be the kind of thing before it became policy that everybody would say, oh, well, it's available, but nobody took it.
Yeah.
So, and so you really needed to have those examples out there and see that it was something that, the firm really wanted you to do it. Yeah. In fact, you had a responsibility for doing that to set the right tone, particularly if you were more senior.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eileen, I want to bring you in on the point that Sharon raised around culture. And one thing I've wondered is if the COVID work environment presents an opportunity for firms to try to reset some of the cultures which have traditionally excluded women, because in this era, there isn't everyone going for drinks every night and there isn't everyone going golfing, and the kind of traditional male bonding, shall we say, things aren't happening. So does that provide an opportunity for companies to really reset the kind of activity that they do, the kind of bonding that they do, the culture when everyone gets back in the office next year, 2022, whenever?
I think your point, Laura, about, that those activities aren't taking place and perhaps there is more sponsorship and more of a level playing field culturally. But I honestly don't think that, it's going to change dramatically when people go back. They're going to be like, oh, my gosh, I haven't played golf in how long, and I haven't been out for a drink stew in so long. And I think what we have to do is step back and recognize that people have different ways to be authentically themselves. And how do you put those different, for lack of a better word, activities together to expand the culture? So when I was at Bridgewater, I had 160 different, and it's not that big a firm, affinity groups, not just the basic ones. And people, when they started, could join a group that basically had nothing to do with their day-to-day job. And it really helped expand the culture, but it also helped men and women and minorities come together on things of common interest. And it really made a significant difference in the middle and the more junior ranks. And we still haven't solved the senior ranks. But I don't see, a temporary thing like COVID changing how people fundamentally spend their time and who they want to spend their time with. I do think that you have to think about ways to be more inclusive of women in an authentic way. So, for example, I can't tell you how many golf outings I've been on, and I'd rather watch the grass grow. I even got an award for the most miserable golfer, but in such a good mood. So, and honestly, people were trying to include me. They were really genuinely trying to be, like, hey, come on in.
But come do our thing rather than we'll go do your thing, I guess. So,
yeah, so I'm saying, what are those things? What are the fabrics that companies can put together that casts a wider net for people to really belong to different things? And it's a lot more than 4 affinity groups or 20 other groups focused on microfinancing or something else. We're complicated. We all have different things we like to do, and big companies have a tremendous opportunity to spread that net to bring people in that way. And I think that's pretty important, coupled with sponsorship, coupled with, policies and procedures that make things easier for people when they're on board. And then I think we need to look more on re-onboarding. So we all know that we're going to lose a certain amount of people in the middle for a certain period of time. Well, how do we bring them back in? How do we keep track of them? Public accounting firms, like I know Deloitte does a great job with this. and they have a lot of things that they do with this, as does PwC and Ernst & Young. So I think those firms are well ahead, with all due respect, of my brethren in financial services. That said, Jamie Dimon has been, terrific to women, both at JP Morgan and outside, as people like John Mack. So there are some, leaders who really walk the talk, so to speak.
Okay, thank you very much. And Sharon, on the cultural point, because I know you're keen to talk about culture as well. What do you think are the key cultural challenges that we still have? I mean, there are lots of them, but say, what are the 2 or 3 main ones that workplaces still need to deal with?
So, I mean, one of the things we've been working really hard at Deloitte is creating a fully, inclusive culture. And Eileen referenced earlier that, everyone used to focus on diversity, and that, diversity is important because you do need to track how you're doing. But we wanted everyone to feel that they can be included, that they can be themselves and thrive at work every day. And that does require really substantive culture change in most organizations. And I do think it has to be led by the CEO, and they have to be held accountable by the board. The overall tone from the top is critical. So as I say, the CEO at Deloitte, obviously me, the global board, the global executive. And it's particularly important, in terms of Zoom land as well, which is a great lever in many ways, but it's very hard to pick up on non-verbal cues. So, our strategy around inclusion is about focusing on everyday behaviors. And I don't know if we talk a lot about micro behaviors and then microaggressions, and sort of people think microaggressions are very minor. It's not a big thing. It's sort of, you see a couple of people coming towards you, and you on one of them, you absolutely, hello, how are you? It's really great to see you. And the other person, you sort of more or less ignore. That's a kind of microaggression. And you'll see, we've been doing a lot of training with our people to identify just small things that happen on a daily basis that can undermine people, and try and show that, we all have to work much harder to address those micro behaviors and to make everybody feel really included. There's a huge amount of things that have to happen to really drive culture change. As Eileen said earlier, there's no silver bullet. And it is all around, the whole career life cycle: recruitment, promotion, succession, mentoring, agile working, sponsorship, and putting in place, hard actions to make sure that they support women, but our inclusion strategy is about everybody, and that's what I suppose is so important, and that by helping everyone feel included, they will be much more successful, happier, and hopefully you will retain more people as well.
So Sharon, I was just about to come to you and ask you if it's possible for firms to meaningfully measure progress around culture, or is it just something that you have to take a feel of?
That's a really interesting question, and it's quite hard to measure it in a tangible way, other than, we do set goals for the number of women in leadership, for example, the number of women partners. And if you can see that you're progressing towards the goals that you set, I think you clearly are improving the culture. But one of the things that we did in the UK was to run training sessions for all of our partners and directors, and then cascade it to our people around an inclusive culture, and provided specific examples and case studies. And one of the people who led a lot of those sessions, we did it sort of 5 years ago and then a year ago. He said to me that the conversations he had a year ago were completely different to the conversations he'd had 5 years ago, and that the understanding that people had of the impact of their actions, and also the recognition that was not, things that were no longer acceptable, even some of the things that were more subtle. He could see a really, really big change in how our partners talked about these things, which I suppose was some tangible evidence that we had moved the culture.
And Joyce, I want to ask you, is there any argument that COVID could be positive in some of these areas, in that, I personally know some men who've had to care for their children for the first time in their entire lives, and who've actually had to do the kind of juggling that some women do every day. So is there a chance that it could make some people evolve in their views and could actually be a positive agent for change? Joyce, do you think?
some positive aspects. And one of them is just like not the amount of time commuting or traveling. So that to me is the biggest thing that can be positive. If you're in the sort of that bracket where you have a job that required that, but that doesn't help a lot of women who've really been hard hit by COVID. But in financial services, I do see that, just having more time at home for both, for both working mothers and their partners actually is a real benefit. So that's one of the benefits. I mean, is that you just have more time that you can spend with family if you're not spending 2 or 3 hours commuting, or if you're not traveling 50% of the time. I mean, I have a job where I travel 50% of the time. So this is actually the first time where I've had, this much time at home, honestly, or this much time not traveling since college. But I think that, the whole question on can you mandate, culture or measure it? I do think very much what Sharon said is that a lot of firms now are really requiring the, basically training on unconscious bias. And saying that, on unconscious bias, it's not that we all know what the rules are. We all know what the guidelines are. Everybody has good intentions, but they are really going through the case studies. And so we have that also at JP Morgan. And then we also started something called Candid Conversations, where instead of something that's like a big event, it is a smaller group discussion that's, considered an off the record discussion with somebody senior where people give their feedback. So I think that, there are ways in which the training is going to change, and there are ways in which the amount of travel that we did, I don't think that's going to go back anytime soon, and that does provide some flexibility too.
Got it. So Eileen, I want to follow up with you on one of those points that Joyce raised, because the idea of a more flexible workforce going forward obviously has its positive aspects, but is there a risk that we end up with a kind of a dual level workforce where you have women who end up working from home on a more permanent basis, men who end up being in the office, and that actually leading to an even greater divide in the career outcomes for men and women?
I'll answer your question in a second, but I just want to add to your last question. I have found a lot of what Joyce and Sharon said, but on the cultural piece, we're going to hear about our cultures on Glassdoor. So what I would also suggest for people's consideration is anonymous surveys, and they really be anonymous, done by a different company. And, when you get an 85, 85% of the people are happy. Well, who are the 15% that aren't, and what's going on there? So I think surveys can really help in ways that, the explicit information doesn't always show. To your question on workforce flexibility, I have been a proponent of working from home since 1985. Basically, I think that, and I've talked on it at many different places, I think that giving people that flexibility, both men and women, we're all adults, is really incredibly important. And I think one of the positives of COVID is that it has forced companies that weren't willing to do or flexible about work from home to really push them. So I think that's been great. Do I think we should all work from home 100% of the time? I honestly don't, unless someone's unable to for some period of time. I think the socialization, the community is really important. So I think, working from home, 70, 80% of the time, fine, but I wouldn't go beyond that. I probably wouldn't go beyond 70 for those reasons. Would it be more men or women? It hasn't been my experience when offering flexible work arrangements to people. I've seen the number of men and women, equally take that up. So I don't think it needs to have a two workforce thing at all. I really don't. But I think you have to monitor it and you have to measure it like anything else. And then you have to understand what are the problems with this. And you have to deal with those problems, and you have to get at those problems however best you can, be it anonymous surveys, be it regular surveys, be it however you get at the metrics. So I really don't worry about that. I worry about it going too far to the opposite extreme, candidly, from my perspective.
Got it. And we are now down to our final 10 minutes or so. So I just wanted to mention to the audience again, if you have any questions, we're getting into the last chance saloon for those. So please do that on and chat those. While you're thinking about your questions, Sharon, I'm going to come to you and ask you about, are you concerned at all, or is there any sense that because companies are fighting, or in some industries are fighting for their survival in this environment, because the economic environment is very challenging in some areas and some industries, that they're going to place less time and less emphasis around the diversity question, just because their main focus is trying to restore the profitability or trying to just stay in business?
I mean, it is a really good question, Laura. I think that actually companies need to retain as many people as they can. If you're going through survival, the last thing you need is lots of people leaving and you having to, hire people, retrain them, because that costs a lot of money. And you should already have a diverse workforce, hopefully, so you should be looking to retain those. But also, Eileen referenced it earlier. Companies, there's a lot of evidence, a lot of surveys that have shown that companies that have diverse workforces are more successful in terms of profitability, but also in terms of their sort of approach to risk management. They manage risks better. It leads to more innovation and creativity. So it would be you'd be shooting yourself in the foot if you weren't focusing on diversity at this time, even as you're struggling with everything else. And I guess, one of the things we've been really emphasizing throughout this pandemic is the importance of dialing up inclusion activities and dialing up how we support people and make them feel, very, very valued. And just, I suppose, to build on Eileen's comments about, we call it agile working. We do think it is critical to provide that agility to our people. And we had that before. It has, obviously, everyone's now doing it. But we do have to ensure that, as we start to come back to work, that people continue to focus on what we call output and not presenteeism. Because, as I went into the office last week and I was amazed, there were quite a lot of people coming back to offices, but they were disproportionately men. And it would not be good if all the people early in are all of the men, and everyone goes, oh, it's great, and that presenteeism culture starts to come back. That would be a big backward step. We need to focus on outputs.
Okay, Eileen, I could see you in one of my little screens nodding away as Sharon was talking about the dangers of kind of companies taking their eye off the ball because they're busy dealing with the pandemic. Would you like to elaborate on your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, for the last 15 years, firms like Deloitte, firms like McKinsey, BCG, et cetera, have put out study after study after study that says diverse teams produce better PBT and better ROE. I myself, I owe my success to having a diverse team. It's more creative and it's helped me get better and better solutions. So it's antithetical to the logic and body of evidence to reduce diverse teams of people. And yet we'll see that done. So even though we all know intellectually that diverse teams produce better results, we will see more, at least in every other financial crisis or other situation, more minorities and women be displaced. And it's not just women in service areas. So that's why I keep coming back to, and I really wish I didn't have to say this, but unfortunately, I think some of these things are going to have to be, really looked at closely through required and mandated disclosures so that people see who's doing well with it and who's not. And maybe we should give companies that do well with it, in addition to them probably doing better in PBT, some credits, regulatory capital credits or tax credits. I don't know. I'm not saying we should do that, but something has got to be done. I've been looking at this for 40 years. And I hope I see it get closer to where it needs to be before I, lay myself down to sleep, because it's not enough.
Well, hopefully we have quite some time on that. But on the issue of it being mandated, who could actually mandate it? I mean, in the financial services sector, I guess FINRA could, or like a regulator could, but in the kind of
FINRA cannot. We are.
You can't.
But disclosures are under the auspices of the SEC.
For the public companies.
Yeah, for public companies and basically investors. I can't tell you how many investors, and I applaud them. I want to hug them, that are insisting.
Don't hug anyone these days. No hugging.
Thank you, Laura. That's good advice. Good advice. But my virtual hug I applaud them that are asking for, what are your diversity statistics? Yeah. And people think, they're just doing it because, it's a good thing to do. No, they know that it improves profitability. And yes, it is the right thing to do too. So that's what I mean by mandated. And I don't think without it, look, when we had the financial crisis, when every firm, was losing on what was nothing more than negative convexity, what happened? We got regulations up the wazoo about market risk, credit risk, et cetera. Do the same thing with diversity and inclusion.
So, Joyce, I want to ask you about this because I'm sure in your day job you see a lot of this, but how seriously are the investors you talk to, taking the diversity and inclusion point?
Well, no, this was actually, a sort of remarkable year for ESG investing. And the big change this year was that the S and the G became a lot more important. It wasn't just about climate change because of the pandemic. And so I think there is an opportunity, with the new administration coming in the U.S., basically saying we have a Build Back Better plan. We have a $755 billion child care provision proposal. And that, are you going to put in more ESG requirements? And it's also a year where ESG funds actually outperformed in this environment as well. So to me, it seems like, if you can actually translate some of this into, is this part of ESG investing? It's not just climate change, it's the social and governance piece. Okay. The governance piece is women's representation, not just on boards, but in the C-suite, because on the boards where it is mandated, there's been progress. In the C-suite, not as much. And can you put more on the social side, which deals with some of these things that are related more to child care provisions. So look, I do think that the pandemic has brought about this discussion, and with a change in administration that's more focused on ESG investing, will you actually have this be something that's not just talked about, but you actually have some of the guidelines changed? Because a lot of this got rolled back over the last 4 years. And is this an opportunity? And when you look at what's happening in the U.S. right now, it's going to be a record number of female cabinet appointments. First female vice president. I mean, there are lots of ways in which, the corporates are having to take notice of this, and it's gone more to the sort of stakeholder capitalism and changing the mandate from just shareholder primacy.
Got it. So we have our final 2 minutes. So I'm going to give you each the same question, which is, if you could change one thing if you could have progress on one single factor, what would that factor be? And you each have 30 seconds maximum, and I will be timing. So Sharon, if you could change one thing or have progress on one factor, what would that be?
So I talked about sponsorship before. I absolutely do think that it absolutely moves the dial for women by having someone advocate for them, give them opportunities and enable them to progress, because one of the challenges is that you're looking for women to fill gaps, and there's not women with the right experience. So get them sponsored, give them the right development, they'll be ready for the next promotion, and we'll move through.
Excellent, and you had 5 seconds to spare. Eileen, what is the one thing you would like to change / have done in the next year or two?
Standardized disclosures on diversity and inclusion.
Excellent. You have 20 seconds to spare. Joyce, what's the one thing you would like to do?
Well, I'm a research analyst, so I agree with Eileen. So it is actually the disclosure and mandating piece of it, and also collecting the feedback in a different way so that it really is anonymous and can be used and put into place in a way that is not as personalized.
Got it. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, but thank you all so much for your participation. Thank you everyone who dialed in to listen. Sorry again about that brief 2-minute interruption when the Zoom thing went down. We all got back on, so all is well that ends well. Thank you very much.